we'll start with introductions, and Jessica, I thought I would kind of shoot it over to you to kind of walk through introductions. I'll start with me, and then maybe if you could walk people through that. So I'm Annette Hoffman. I work for the Department of Ecology, and I am the chair of the Cannabis Science Task Force.
And this is Jessica Archer with Ecology, and I'm coordinating the task force. And let's head over to Department of Health next.
This is Caroline West, and I'm with the Department of Health.
Shelley Rowden, medical marijuana program manager for Department of Health.
All right, let's go to Department of Agriculture. You guys, I think you guys are muted if you're trying to talk right now, Brad or Mike.
Yeah, Brad's here.
And Mike?
Mike Furman is here with the Department of Agriculture.
Great. And let's go to LCB next.
Kendra Hodgson, manager with the Examiners Unit from Liquor and Cannabis Board.
Hi, Kendra.
Nick Pullman, Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board chemist.
Great. And back to Department of Ecology. Can other folks from Ecology introduce themselves, please?
Ryan Zabrowski with the Ecology's Lab Accreditation Unit and PT Work Group leader.
Erisa Carrick, chemist for Ecology.
All right.
Pool Ecology.
Alyssa Peter, Ecology.
All right, and let's go next to Amber, and then Jeff, and then Nick.
Amber Wise
You're
from,
muted, Amber.
sorry, it took me a sec to find it. This is Amber Wise from Medicine Creek Analytics, and I'm on the steering committee.
Hey, this is Jeff Dowdy with Capital Analysis. I'm a steering committee member.
This is Nick with Confidence Analytics, also on the steering committee.
All right, I think we have introduced the entire steering committee. Did I forget anyone?
Hey, Jessica, I just wanted to remind everyone that the Cannabis Observer is also recording this meeting.
Thank you, Annette.
And I just want to chime in to Jen Carlson, not on the steering committee, but part of the ecology team working on the cannabis work.
Thanks for joining us, Jen. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully everyone can see our agenda. We'll have a short meeting today, ending at around 11, maybe a little bit earlier. And first up on the agenda, we have an update from Ryan from the PT work group. So go ahead and take it away, Ryan.
All right, give me a minute to get my
Sorry, cannot hear to Ryan.
Oh.
Okay. All righty, I'll go ahead and hit F5 here. Can everyone see my screen? Or maybe not everyone. Is my screen sharing is the better way to ask this?
Not yet.
Okay. 1 second. Okay, so you probably have my email open right now. Got the wrong screen going on. If I can move it over here. All right. So this is the first time I've presented with this format. So I need to make sure I get this set up right. Apologize for goofing this up. Give me 1 second.
Well, while you're doing that, Ryan, we can give a quick update on the report. So as you guys know, the report has been kind of in the final stages. And at this point, it is back with the publications team and getting ready to go to the next big steps of getting over to the governor's office. And Sarah, do you want to give a quick update on the timeline for that, Sarah, or Jen? I know we're really close to pushing it over to the governor's office.
Whoops.
I think you guys are muted, Sarah or Jen.
This is Sarah. Yeah, so the next step, and actually I may defer to Jen if it's back with publications. Do you know, is that correct?
No, the report is actually with our governmental relations team at the moment, and they will be reviewing it for 2 to 3 weeks. They'll give edits back to the team, and then on June 3rd, it goes to the governor's office for review.
Great.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thanks for the update. Looks like Ryan has his slides up now, so I'm just going to turn it back over to you, Ryan, for your presentation.
Alrighty, I had to make sure I was unmuted. All right, so hopefully I've got this hashed out. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone, but this is my first time presenting with this format of WebEx, so I want to make sure it went off correctly. So, all right, so welcome everyone. Good morning. I hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy, and got a chance to enjoy the nice weather we had last week in some way, shape, or form. So since our last steering committee meeting, the PT work group has had 2 meetings. Both of them were WebEx based. We had full attendance at both of them. Myself, Alyssa, and Sarah represented ecology. Steve Lacroix from DOH, Ching from Department of Ag, Nick from LCB. We had Jay from Treeline, Steve Loeb from Integrity, and Bonnie and Kyle from Praxis and Medicine Creek, respectively. So first meeting on April 28th, we let off addressing some concerns raised at the last steering committee meeting about a couple of our survey questions. We addressed those concerns and made a couple of minor clarifications to the other questions. Sarah mentioned to the group that we could leverage our communications team here at Ecology to help us both maximize our responses to the survey and clean it up a little bit further, make it a more presentable product. The group gave their blessing, and then Sarah, Alyssa, and I finalized getting that survey done over the next week, and then, as many of you may know, was distributed last Monday. We gave 2 weeks for feedback to allow ample time for every lab to gather that wishes to participate, time to gather responses. After that, we moved into addressing, outlining our requirements from what we would want in a host lab for generating a PT model or PT material, both in the permanent model and this trial run that we've been discussing. This information would be a useful tool when contacting the prospective host labs. And with this, they would have a much clearer idea of what exactly is being asked of them for hosting the production of the PT study. We started by running through all the necessary physical equipment that we know a PT provider wasn't going to be able to fly in from out of state and bring. For example, they're not bringing their own HPLC with them. That's as we all probably guess, it's a little bit difficult to move one of those things. We also need it. We also wanted to make it clear that this host lab has to be just legally capable of holding marijuana on site for the purpose of this, whether it's in some form of license or a state lab's IAA MOU between LCB or what other involved parties. The lab representatives all mentioned it was likely the best case for this to be an independent lab of a commercial setting. Some of the representatives were a bit more concerned than others about it, but we all agreed it was the best interest of all parties involved. The group generally felt willing to accept a trial run being at a participating lab if that's our only way of getting this trial off the ground, but that it became critical for this to be at a state lab or some other lab that's not involved directly with actually participating in the study. So next topic was moving on to outlining the requirements of the PT provider, which would give us critical information down the road if we do have to go through a formal bidding process for the permanent model. This would give us a list of items available to give to these providers and say, this is what we need you to be able to do. Can you meet these requirements? So we leveraged our earlier recommendations regarding logistics and ISO requirements and then just expanded from there. The final piece for the permanent model came again back to licensing. It was mentioned that since technically a transaction involving marijuana is occurring for this PT study, this provider will have to have some sort of license. For the trial run, since we are still operating under the intention of this being sponsored by the Cannabis Task Force funds, we might not have this same issue. Myself and Sarah have been working together to look into what those avenues could look like. I also mentioned to the group that I will reach out to our colleagues at ORLAP and see if they have any insight that could be useful in this venture. So in 2 weeks later, we reconvened on May the 12th. Again, starting the meeting off, just kind of updating the group on where the survey was at, as well as giving them an update in regards to my discussions with ORLAP. The biggest, excuse me. So the biggest takeaway from my communications with ORLAP that I wanted to share with the group were what the required tests are that ORLAP says, you know, this is in this in-matrix PT, these are the required tests for it, as well as they did go through a formal bidding process. As far as the required testing go, they require pesticides and potency in flower, and the labs must participate in that study, or in those studies. However, they are allowed to use Emerald or Finova or anyone else for the remaining tests. So the rest of the meeting was focused on going through each of the required tests as of, or in WAC 314.55.102 and deciding what our recommendations would be for each required test. Due to flower lots having the largest scope of required tests, that's where we decided to start. We leaned on our data mining exercise as a good sanity check for the practicality of our recommendations. This will come into play a little bit later, but I definitely wanted to get that clear on the, or we made that clear at the onset in our meeting. Ideally, we would be hitting this gold standard that we talked about in the past, where each of the analytes of interest, whether it's pesticides, metals, etc., are all present in a cannabinoid dominant marijuana flower and were present in the material of the plant in a quote unquote natural form, where the pesticides and the metals were found in the product by natural means, whether it's pesticides being leached up through the soil or sorry, metals being leached up through the soil or pesticides being applied during the growth process, not spiking them on into a finished product as the current model exists in some places. Obviously, until some provider starts growing marijuana solely for that purpose, we aren't likely going to have that much of the gold standard available. I also mentioned to the group that since metals and pesticide testing will very likely be a required test by the time our report is due to the legislature, we will also address those tests as well. For the purpose of this exercise, I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page of what we consider to be in matrix, and we defined it as a cannabinoid dominant marijuana flower. So For the most part, there was really not too much disagreement when we were working our way through the tests. For the most part, it was we'd say, all right, what is everyone's thoughts on pesticides in flower? And one representative would say, I think it's this because this. And for the most part, we just kind of all agreed that's where the science was telling us to go. The general idea being if a hemp flower PT does not get treated significantly different or does not behave analytically significantly different than a typical sample for that test, that would be acceptable. Towards the end of the meeting, the question came up in regards to a high CBD versus high THC differences. Similar to the thoughts of the pesticide work group, some of our work group members believe that we should make sure to include a separate PT for high CBD flower. Their argument for being some labs end up having to treat them differently, and they should have a PT to reflect this. The arguments against there were two major arguments against this. According to our data mining exercise, there was less than 2% of all flower samples submitted over that 6-month period that qualified as high CBD. And the other point being some labs have been able to overcome this high CBD, high THC hurdle through their own method validation. Unfortunately, we were reaching the end of our allotted time, so we kind of had to make a note on this and that we move on and address this in future meetings. So I asked the group to keep these thoughts in mind, come up with possible solutions, and we can address them at our next meeting. So kind of the moment we've been waiting for here. Matrix recommendations that the group settled on. I'm going to kind of go through these. I'm not going to go through these top down. I'm going to go through these in like bunches because there's basically three different answers here. The group believed that for potency and pesticides that these two tests more than the others really need to be in matrix as much as humanly possible. A hemp flower would really only be acceptable in extreme cases, and that would probably have to be handled case by case between the lab, the accrediting body, and probably as well the client at that point. The next step down was the microbial and mycotoxin analysis, where in matrix would be great if possible. However, we believe hemp is serviceable. Steve Lacroix from DOH mentioned, especially in microbial test, it's more about your lab's capability of growing on this material less than the actual material itself. However, we felt that there just wasn't enough information out there to prove one way or the other if the presence of cannabinoids inhibits or enhances growth of microbes. There may be some studies out there that yield answers one way or another. We just weren't aware of it at the time of our meeting. So, and then the last group being metals, water activity, and foreign matter. Due to, especially for metals, where metals you just kind of digest it in some nitric acid or whatever acid you're using, and it doesn't really matter if there's cannabinoids present or not. It all gets digested away. It doesn't really matter if it's a cannabinoid flower or a hemp flower. And then similarly for water activity and foreign matter, that the process of those tests is really, it doesn't really matter if it's hemp or not. So now the two action items that we have for the next meeting is we want to finalize that high CBD, high THC discussion. And then we're going to continue working through the required WAC tests, probably likely starting with intermediate products and then working towards end products. So that's update from me. Are there any questions from anybody I'd be willing to answer regarding both our meeting or maybe even the study or the survey that we distributed? Give a second, stop sharing my screen. So I'm not hearing any questions out there. Is there anybody
Ryan.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I've got is that there can potentially be a problem with ELISA-based tests in mycotoxins with CBD high product. You can get around it pretty easily, but there is that interference problem that you may want to account for.
And I'll follow up on that too. I'm wondering if you have any feedback about, from an analytical perspective, how is the mycotoxin test different than the pesticide test?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that question. Can you say that again?
Well, so I'm looking on that last slide that you showed, where you're saying which tests need to be performed in matrix. I'm wondering why the mycotoxin test is different from the pesticide test, given that they're both trace level organic residues.
That one was from our discussion. That was, we do want it to be in matrix impossible, or if possible. To be honest, I think just from our discussion, it just seemed to be that it could be very similar to a pesticide. That's not my exact area of expertise. I've never really done a myco test, so I don't know if I personally have a great answer for that. But our work group felt that it was a little bit less critical than pesticides for it to be in matrix, although we still would strongly prefer that it should be. I hope that answers your question.
I'm not sure why a distinction is being made between the two.
So we did, we had the difference between the two because they're separate tests in WAC. That's maybe a question I don't exactly have an answer for why the work group felt it was a little bit less strongly about us getting it to be in matrix relative to pesticides. But that is a good point we could take a look at our next meeting.
This is Jeff again. The interference that I mentioned with CBD and ELISA is really the only reason why I could think that we would want to have it in matrix and kind of labeled in the same way as pesticides. I would agree with Nick on that.
Okay. Are there any other questions for me? Like I said, Jeff and I think that was Nick, who was the other one speaking, Nick Mosley. I'll bring these back to the work group and we'll include it into our discussion. So thank you for bringing those up. Just so you guys know, at this time. Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say at this time, we don't feel like we need to bring anything to motion yet. We want to do this in totality when it comes to matrix recommendations for all the required tests.
Great. All right. Alyssa, could you put up the agenda? Could you put that back up onto the screen? All right. So next up, we've got potency and metals work group and solicitation update. And we'll go ahead and turn that over to Mike first to talk about any updates on the potency work group as far as potential launch dates, any conversations that have been happening around that.
So I don't have a lot of updates in terms of we haven't actually had our first meeting. We still haven't started. At this point, we are considering starting, so we would like feedback from the group. If we go forward at this point, we expect COVID will continue to dominate Department of Health. So we don't know whether or not we'll get full participation from them, but we do feel that we could proceed forward at this point and try and have some meetings with the people that we have available. So that's where we are right now, and
excellent.
I don't have anything to say. We sort of have put the whole effort on pause, sort of to give some breathing room to people we think are important to include in the conversation, but have been diverted by, the current emergency situation we have.
That's great to hear, Mike. And just remember, you you can reach out to Alyssa for all the administrative support. I'm just trying to get those meetings going. Anybody have any thoughts or questions on the potency work group?
This is Amber. Sorry, this is Amber Wise. I just had a quick question. Did I catch that correctly that it was just on sort of indefinite pause and there was no timeline to think about restarting these groups?
So that actually the opposite is what I was trying to communicate. We think that we'd like to go forward at this point with the group that we have now, with the understanding that we may have reduced participation or the Department of Health participants may have to leave in order to work on COVID or to cover for some other issue in Department of Health because of the resources. But we do think that at this point we could continue and start the meetings and have our first meeting and get going on it in the next several weeks. Unless there is some concern about, particularly from Department of Health, but unless there's some other concern that we really need to wait for those people that have more time to commit to it.
Gotcha, thank you. So I'm hearing in the next several weeks.
Our plan is to, after listening to feedback from this meeting and assuming that we get a positive response, to send out a doodle poll or some sort of poll to set up a time for an initial meeting and proceed from there.
Great, thank you very much.
This is Shelley Rowden. I was just curious, can you tell me who we have committed to the potency work group or who we had recommended that would sit in on that work group? I think I know we talked about having Caroline, but she's leading the heavy metals work group, and so that wouldn't work for her. But I was just wondering, did we ever come up with a backup plan for somebody from DOH to participate with the potency work group?
It was my understanding that it was Steve Officer, but obviously if Department of Health would like to substitute somebody else, that would be acceptable too. Initially it was Caroline, but the concern is at this point is if we're starting up the metals work group and she's chairing that work group, that would put her in a position of having to be the chair of a work group as well as participate on another group. That seems to be too much work, particularly for a unit that's already working a fairly aggressive schedule or extremely aggressive schedule, depending on how you look at it. So it was my understanding that Steve was going to fill in for that role. That would be certainly wonderful if he was able to do it, but I don't have a third person if that was the concern.
Okay. So I guess at this point, I would maybe recommend that you at least keep Steve updated on the decisions or the actions of the work group, if you could. Just include him on any back and forth emails and things like that. I will connect with him unless Caroline wants to offer some guidance around that. I'll connect with Steve to see what his preference is and then get back with you.
Okay, that would be good. And we're going to send it, like I said, try and send out a poll. So if there's some scheduling way to make this better off too, that would be helpful information so that we could do it in a way that was gives the most possibility of participation from all participants.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So if no one has any other questions on the potency work group, I'm going to turn it over to Caroline West to give us an update on the metals work group. And I think this is Caroline's first steering committee meeting as a work group lead. So thank you, Caroline, for offering to do this work. And we definitely really appreciate having your expertise as part of the task force. So I'll just turn it over to you to give us an update.
Thank you. So metals work group is even newer than the potency one, as you guys know. But from my understanding, we sent out the solicitations on May 8th, which was last Friday. We've gotten 16 respondances so far, and so we'll start taking a look at those. But it doesn't close until the 27th, so there's still time for people to reach out if they want to be a part of it. So just go ahead and let us know. And hopefully when we have a meeting on the different people who did respond, we'll choose who will be on the work group, and then we'll do the same thing where we'll get a doodle poll out to try and get the first meeting scheduled. We're probably thinking the beginning of July for that. So if anyone has any questions. You have to come here. Okay. Okay, good job. I guess that's it.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you for the update. All right, we are cruising through this agenda, you guys. The next thing we're gonna talk about is just a client update. So we were hoping to hear from the agencies involved in the client developing the client role, LPD, Department of Ag, and Department of Health. If you guys could give us a little bit of an update on the client.
The agencies have had a standing meeting every Monday for most of April and through May, having some discussions. We have a rough outline right now. A lot of it, the pieces that are not yet finished are what we believe are the resource, basically the money implications, and the resource implications to do it in full versus a modified. So those conversations are continuing. In all honesty, I believe most in state government or those who are connected and private will have seen Governor Inslee's announcements regarding hiring freezes and budget cuts. And I personally do believe that that has implications for this work. On agencies who will be required to make cuts will be difficult to use existing resources when resources are possibly going away. And so I just put that out there very frankly, that is part of our conversations and a continuing changing dynamic as some of this work, at least as the way we originally envisioned it, would have included a request to fund this. And that starts to also look shaky in the next legislative session in light of if there really are budget cuts at each one of our agencies or in different ways, the ask of money becomes much more difficult. So we're still working those things through and having those conversations, but did want to share that the landscape of reduced revenue projections definitely has an impact.
Thanks, Kendra. Thank you for that. Department of Ag and Health, do you folks have anything to add?
No, I think Kendra summarized that up nicely. Again, it's just looking at like what existing resources do we have that could be dedicated to that work if funding was not available. I don't think we have any resources at Department of Health that we could dedicate to that. So at the time currently, so yeah, it's just looking at those details. And I think we'll be having some meaty discussions this week with that over that topic. So
And on the Department of Ag side, just to share, the individual they assigned to this work is Kelly McLean, who's not been involved in these conversations with the Cannabis Science Task Force, but she reports directly up through, I believe her title is assistant to the director for their policy work. And so she wouldn't be on the call here. She did share that they, and I hope this is still true, that they've had a chance to touch base with Mike on some of those conversations, but the primary point for ag isn't on this particular call today.
Does anyone have any questions about the client? Okay, well, we're getting to the end of our meeting pretty quickly here. One thing before we go into our, yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to remind everybody that we're going to be sending out a doodle poll to get the next 6 months of meetings. Is that what you're about to say?
That is exactly you're reading my mind, Annette. Perfect.
Okay, you go ahead.
Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah, so our next meeting is scheduled for June 24th, and that's the last one that we have on the books. And as Annette mentioned, there's going to be a doodle poll coming out to schedule meetings for the following month. And so that's pretty much our only next step. The PT work group will be continuing. It sounds like the other work groups will be starting up pretty soon. Does anybody have any questions before we go into our public feedback session? Any questions or comments on next steps? Okay. All right. So without further ado, we will jump into our public feedback session. And with this new version of WebEx, Alyssa, I'm not exactly sure how you want to do that. If you can pull people in, I'll turn it over to you, Alyssa, to provide instruction for that.
Yeah, so I don't know if Tara, if you have a preference as the host, attendees or anybody can submit. Why don't you send in a chat or use the Q&A feature if you'd like to offer feedback.
There is a question in the Q&A from Sean Wagenseller. I'm not sure, Ryan, if you saw this already. Can you explain the goal of the potency part of the work group? Are you looking at ranges, maximum, minimums?
I don't believe at this point this is an item on our schedule. I think that's right now we're focusing right now on just our matrix recommendations. I also think that may or may not be within the scope of the PT work group. It might be something for down the road when we have our own separate potency work group, which I do believe is still our plan at this point. I believe it would fall into their purview, but if I'm mistaken from that, feel free to correct me, Annette and Jess.
Yeah, I would agree with Ryan. This is Kendra from LCB. The purpose of the potency work group is about validating, right, the testing, right, and that labs have standardized procedures or, right, performance methods that we're going over, and that can be validated that they're in fact testing correctly and reporting accurately the potency, but it is not intended to address any policy, which sits in a different set of rule around what is required to be reported or what is quote unquote potency. And we've talked about that here, and just admittedly for some of the history on what is potency and maybe a more accurate is the cannabinoid profile. The ranges would not be as far as like what our ranges or if there are minimum or maximum ranges. It is specific to how is potency tested.
Okay. Anybody else before I go to the next question? Do you want to add?
Yeah, this is Mike. I think one of the questions the potency work group is going to have to deal with when designing a method is making sure the method is fit to purpose. And some of those questions are probably going to consume significant time in discussing to make sure that whatever method is able to meet the policy goals, or the policymaker is able to use the results of the method to properly evaluate, the answer that they need. So there are several different potency methods, and it does need to be something that's fit to purpose.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Sean Wagenseller again. How would it help this work to establish a cannabis commission this next session? How could this group's input help legislators establish a research commission?
So, Tarlin, this is Annette, and I'll take a stab at that. I think right now this is not really a question and answer session. This is a public feedback session, but we are just the task force has got a very specific task that we have to accomplish, and that was defined in that House bill. So we are moving down that road. We have identified a path that has different pieces that we've been talking about all along. So we feel like we are on a successful trajectory to meet the needs of this task force.
And just to add to what Annette was saying, so the task force has a number of different work groups that were established to address, defining what analytical methods should be used for all the required testing, along with all the validation protocols, any regulation changes that need to take place in order to put those into practice, and a number of other things that were spelled out in House Bill 1052 in the previous legislative session. So, the one thing that may be useful to look at if you'd like to learn more about what the task force is doing, is you could take a look at the report when it comes out, which should be, in the next few months. The report on the pesticide analytical work will be available online. That report will be, but the work group the work groups are made up of chemists and microbiologists, folks with expertise in the specific work group, whichever, the pesticide work group, the potency work group, depending on which one it is. So I think that sort of fills sort of the idea that you're discussing. Anybody want to add anything to that? Oh, Sarah has posted the website there to learn more about. You can learn more about the work of the task force. It's a good link. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Tarlin.
Okay, so hopefully you can still hear me. Okay, my screen is completely frozen. The next question from the same Sean Wagenseller, can you explain what is happening with the random testing that is commissioned by LCB to happen?
So if the question here about random testing that's commissioned by LCB to happen, that actually doesn't have any relevance to this particular work group. Department of Ecology has not been asked to be involved in that. That's specifically an interagency agreement between the Liquor and Cannabis Board and Washington Department of Agriculture. We do no longer, there was at one point in time a secret shopper testing program that we had up and running, but that's been on the shelf for a number of years now. The only existing tests are very specific regarding two interagency agreements we have around potency and pesticides on samples that we, the agency, take to Department of Agriculture. And that contract is managed by the enforcement unit at LCB.
Okay, thank you. And one last question from Shannon Swantek. My guess is that MICOs were not offered in the PT in Matrix PT version because FANOVA does not often get accredited in micro PT analysis and analytes. I think it's more of a statement than a question.
And statements are good there, Carolyn. That's really what the public feedback session is designed for.
I don't see any more. Again, my screen froze, so.
Okay, we'll hand it back to Jessica to bring us home.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for taking time out of your busy day to attend the task force meeting today. And keep an eye out for that doodle poll invite so we can get the next batch of steering committee meetings scheduled. But have a great day, everybody, and just a big thanks to Alyssa for getting us all set up with this new WebEx format. It's been really great. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Have a good day.